Okay. Africa has a clear need to raise revenues. Africa needs revenues for poverty alleviation, to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. It needs revenues to develop infrastructure, to improve for economic development. It needs to be less aid dependent, so revenues are important for that. The difficulty at the moment with Africa is many African countries are not raising sufficient revenues for those purposes. The estimate for the Millennium Development Goals is that you need a tax to GDP ratio of around 20%. They were the UN's estimations. Many African countries are in the 10 to 15% range, so it needs a permanent increase in revenues. The difficulty is, where are those revenues going to come from? At the moment, of course, there's a global trend to lower trade taxes, a traditional tax for developing countries, African countries, to rely upon, but the global trend is to reduce the reliance on trade taxes through trade agreements, WTO membership. The corporate tax, the trend globally is to lower corporate taxes. Africa has very high corporate tax rates, but the issue with Africa and corporate tax is that there are often a lot of tax incentives in the corporate tax system. And Africa needs to look carefully at these tax incentives to make sure that they are justified and to look at understand the revenue impact these tax incentives have. With employment or wages taxes, the difficulty is that many people are either unemployed, so earn no income, or earn very low levels of income, so they're below the taxing threshold. So there's not a lot of scope there in terms of revenues. The value-added tax has been a very important tax in Africa over the last 20 years. I would say probably most, if not all, African countries have some form of value-added tax. The rates are now reasonably high by international standards, in the sort of 15 to 20% range. Again, the problem relates to exemptions. A lot of the VAT systems in Africa have a lot of exemptions in there, and these, again, like the corporate tax, need to be reviewed. If they were to look at those incentives and consider broadening the base, it allows them then to lower the rates, which might also help in attracting foreign investment. The one area where in Africa there has been a significant change has been in extractive industries. Of course, there are African countries that are long-standing in that sector, but there are many new countries to the sector. And that sector does offer the opportunity for countries to increase their revenue from the sector, as long as they have properly structured regimes in place to collect the revenue. Look, I think what's important is that countries have to understand that there's no one instrument for extractive industries. Extractive industries involves a range of instruments that are aimed at different phases of the operation. Extractive industries projects are long projects, 20, 30, 40. I think there's gold projects in Ghana that have been going 100 years. So it is important that there is an instrument like royalties that will collect revenue as soon as production starts, even though there are no profits, because of course what is being extracted is the country's resource, and the country needs to get at least a minimum return for its resource in the form of the royalties. And then as projects become profitable, then the corporate tax and also consideration needs to be given to taxes that tax the resource rent for those highly profitable projects. Because of the issues of fiscal stability and the long-term nature of extractive projects, it's very important that these new countries get these regimes in now, because it is very hard to change the regime midstream. From my experience now, particularly looking at the income tax, which is probably the most complex of the taxes, the value-added tax should operate itself, although the exemptions can cause some complexity. But the income tax is the one that is complex. There are a number of countries in Africa that still have very old income tax laws. I think Kenya, for example, it's 1974 or 75. Those laws have been amended many times. Over time, they lose their coherency. There are inconsistencies which which give rise to planning opportunities, but also give rise to extra compliance costs to make sure that taxpayers are getting it right and administrators are properly enforcing them. We now exist in a self-assessment environment globally, in Africa as well as everywhere else. In Africa, at least in relation to the corporate tax. If we are going to ask taxpayers to self-assess their liability, then they have to be able to do it with some certainty, and that has a number of aspects to it, but one, of course, is that tax laws need to be modernised. They need, income tax laws that is, they need to be modernised, they need to be simplified, they need to be structured in a way that facilitate people making their self-assessments so that there are not a lot of compliance costs involved in passing that assessing role onto the taxpayer through the self-assessment system. So I think an important part of what Africa has to do is make sure that they've got modern and simple income tax laws to facilitate the lowering of compliance costs and also the lowering of administration costs and the elimination of the gaps that can give rise to planning.